things just got intense in the world of trade and politics. US President Donald Trump has once again sparked controversy, this time by announcing a major expansion of tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. But he's not just reinstating old trade restrictions, he's turning up the pressure. Steel imports will now face a hefty 25% tariff, while aluminum will also be hit with additional taxes. And that's not all. Trump has hinted at implementing a reciprocal tariff system, meaning that if another country imposes high taxes on American goods, the US will respond with equally tough tariffs in return. As expected, the move has sent shockwaves across the globe, especially among America's closest trade partners. The European Union and Canada, two of the largest buyers of US goods, accounting for over $550 billion in trade annually, are not happy. If they retaliate with their own trade measures, it could trigger widespread economic consequences, affecting industries and businesses across the US. But just as tensions over tariffs were rising, Trump took things to a whole new level, one that no one saw coming. In a startling interview with Fox News, he floated an idea that left Canadians in disbelief. He suggested that Canada should become the 51st state of the United States. "I think Canada would be much better off as part of the US because we lose $200 billion a year with them, and I'm not going to let that happen," Trump stated, and he didn't stop there. He also took aim at Canada's military spending, arguing that the country relies too heavily on US protection without contributing its fair share. "Why are we protecting another country?" he questioned. Just when it seemed like a passing remark, Trump doubled down. During a pre-Super Bowl interview, he again suggested that Canada couldn't stand on its own without US economic support and military backing. His solution? Absorption into the US as its newest state. Naturally, this didn't sit well with Canada's leaders or its people. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau quickly fired back, calling the proposal an insult to the deep historical ties between the two nations. Politicians across Canada, regardless of party affiliation, stood united in opposition, seeing Trump's remarks not just as political rhetoric, but as a direct challenge to Canada's sovereignty. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh took an even more aggressive stance. Outraged by Trump's new tariffs, he proposed a bold countermeasure, a 100% tariff on Tesla vehicles. With tensions escalating, one thing is clear: this trade war is turning into a high-stakes political showdown. Why Tesla? Because Elon Musk, one of Trump's most outspoken allies, has been a vocal supporter of the former president's economic policies. In response, Canadian leaders have made it clear they won't be pushed around. "If Trump and his billionaire friends think they can pressure Canada, we need to push back," declared Singh. But he didn't stop there. He also proposed a major incentive program to strengthen Canada's electric vehicle industry, suggesting a rebate of up to $10,000 for Canadian-made EVs. This initiative aims to boost domestic manufacturing and reduce reliance on US imports. Meanwhile, Stéphane Dion, Canada's ambassador to France, dismissed Trump's remarks with a pointed response. "If Canada isn't a viable country, then show me a viable country." He emphasized that such rhetoric contradicts international norms and even violates principles outlined in the United Nations Charter. Dion made it clear that Canada is more than capable of standing on its own and will not be intimidated by political theatrics. Just this past Sunday, Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne reinforced how crucial Canadian steel and aluminum are to the US economy. These materials, he explained, aren't just commodities. They're the backbone of critical American industries, including defense, shipbuilding, and auto manufacturing. "Canadian steel and aluminum keep US industries running," Champagne stated. "We're going to keep standing up for our workers and businesses." At the same time, Catherine Cobden, head of the Canadian Steel Producers Association, issued a stark warning about Trump's proposed 25% tariffs. "These tariffs would be a disaster, plain and simple," she cautioned, stressing that they would harm both American and Canadian industries. If the US refuses to grant an exemption, she's calling for immediate retaliation. "Targeting Canadian steel and aluminum is unfair and unjustified," Cobden declared. "We can't just sit back. We need to push back. But this trade standoff isn't just about tariffs on raw materials. It's spilling into national security debates, political maneuvering, and even Arctic defense strategies." Pierre Poilievre, leader of Canada's Conservative Party, is taking a hardline stance, not just on trade, but on strengthening Canada's northern defenses. His plan includes building a new Arctic military base, doubling the number of Inuit Rangers from 2,000 to 4,000, and acquiring 2 additional polar icebreakers to reinforce Canada's presence in the region. To fund these initiatives, he argues that Canada should slash foreign aid, which amounted to roughly $16 billion in 2022-23. Poilievre has specifically criticized what he calls wasteful and corrupt grants, insisting that national defense must take priority, especially given rising concerns over Russian activity in the Arctic. Poilievre also didn't hold back on US trade policies. If he were prime minister, he claimed Canada wouldn't just complain, it would fight fire with fire. "I'd slap the same tariffs on American steel and aluminum," he declared, adding that every dollar collected from those tariffs would go straight back into supporting Canada's steel and aluminum industries. He even suggested that any extra revenue could be used to lower taxes for Canadian businesses and consumers. Ontario Premier Doug Ford echoed these sentiments, calling the tariffs unjustified, unfair, and frankly illegal. While he emphasized that Canada would prefer to build a strong North American trade alliance, he made it clear that if pushed, Canada would push back. The European Union is ready to respond aggressively. The EU will not accept unfair treatment, the European Commission stated, making it clear that they are fully prepared to defend their businesses, workers, and consumers. French President Emmanuel Macron echoed this sentiment in a CNN interview where he didn't hold back. When asked about Trump's latest move, Macron made it clear he was ready for a fight. "I've done it before and I'll do it again," he stated, emphasizing that these tariffs wouldn't just harm Europe, they would also drive up costs in the US, making everyday goods more expensive for American consumers. "Do Americans really want higher prices?" he asked, suggesting that these policies could backfire on the very people Trump claims to protect. But Macron didn't stop there. He also questioned why the US was picking a fight with Europe in the first place. "Is the European Union your biggest problem? No, I don't think so," he said. "Your first problem is China, so maybe focus on that." Meanwhile, French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian sent a strong message of his own. Speaking on French television, he reminded viewers that this wasn't Trump's first attempt at targeting European trade. "We've been here before," he said, "and just like in 2018, we'll respond." Germany is also prepared to strike back quickly. Chancellor Olaf Scholz made it clear that the EU is ready to implement countermeasures immediately. "We can act within an hour if necessary," he warned, signaling that Europe will not hesitate to retaliate. Trade battles between the US and the EU have never been just about steel and aluminum. They've always been a game of strategic moves and counter-moves. If Washington pushes forward with new tariffs, the EU has plenty of ways to hit back. In the past, instead of targeting just metals, Europe has aimed at goods with deep political significance, such as bourbon whiskey, Florida orange juice, and motorcycles. Why? Because these aren't just products. They represent key US industries and regions with strong political influence. The message is clear: if you tax us, we'll make sure your economy feels the impact too. And now, with even more tools at its disposal, the EU's counterpunch could be stronger than ever. A major game changer is the bloc's new anti-coercion instrument, which gives Brussels a powerful arsenal beyond just import tariffs. One of the most impactful options, shutting US companies out of Europe's massive public contracts market, potentially locking American firms out of billion-dollar infrastructure and services projects across the EU. And if that's not enough, the EU could revive a long-dormant weapon, the digital services tax. Originally shelved in favor of a global tax agreement through the OECD, an EU-wide levy on American tech companies could be back on the table. Even if Brussels doesn't implement it universally, individual member states like France might push ahead with their own versions, increasing financial strain on US businesses. But the EU's leverage isn't limited to the tech industry. If tensions escalate further, Brussels could impose new regulatory hurdles on American pharmaceutical firms, agricultural exporters, or even the chemical sector, limiting their access to European markets. While the EU traditionally prefers diplomacy over direct confrontation, these measures would make it impossible for Washington to ignore the economic and political fallout of its tariff policies. Europe is also working to strengthen its global trade partnerships in an effort to reduce reliance on the US. In 2020, 2021, Canada and the EU launched a strategic partnership aimed at securing critical raw materials, or Zrania, a collaboration that has only grown stronger following high-level talks in 2024. The goal is to create diversified, resilient supply chains that aren't dependent on geopolitical rivals or unpredictable trade policies from Washington. Given that trade between the US and the EU exceeds $1 trillion annually, any aggressive moves from Brussels would have far-reaching global consequences, potentially forcing Washington to reassess its approach. With so many options at its disposal, the EU is making one thing clear: a tariff war won't be one-sided. Donald Trump is once again shaking up global trade, reigniting his push for aggressive tariffs on steel and aluminum. This time, he's imposing a hefty 25% duty on steel and additional yet undisclosed tariffs on aluminum. Unlike past trade disputes, Trump is making it clear that no country is off limits, even America's closest allies in Europe and North America. But that's not all. He's also advocating for a reciprocal tariff system, where the US would match the import taxes other countries impose on American goods. Trump is particularly fixated on the European Union's 10% tariff on imported cars, arguing that it's unfair compared to the US's 2.5% tariff. However, critics point out a key detail Trump often overlooks. The US already imposes a steep 25% tariff on imported pickup trucks, one of the most profitable segments of the auto industry. For countries that rely on selling steel and aluminum to the US, this latest move could deal a significant blow. Canada, which supplies nearly 80% of America's aluminum imports, is at the top of the list. Other nations, including Brazil, Mexico, South Korea, and Vietnam, also have much at stake. With Trump leaving the fate of existing duty exemptions and quota agreements uncertain, exporters are scrambling for clarity. Meanwhile, American manufacturers who depend on imported metals are bracing for higher costs. If this all sounds familiar, that's because we've seen it before. Back in 2018, Trump sparked a global trade war by imposing similar tariffs, 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum. Initially, the duties applied to all nations, but after fierce backlash, some countries, including Canada, Mexico, and Brazil, secured exemptions or quota agreements. For a brief period, these measures helped US steel mills increase production in 2019. But with Trump's renewed push for tariffs, all that progress is now at risk as trade battles heat up again in Washington. In response, Canada and the European Union are taking steps to protect themselves. Their strategy? Strengthening trade ties to reduce reliance on the unpredictable US market. Central to this effort is the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, which has been reshaping trade between Canada and the EU since its provisional launch in 2017. With the US repeatedly threatening Canadian exports, Ottawa sees this as a critical moment to expand trade with Europe and offer businesses more alternatives beyond the American market. Canadian Trade Minister Mary Ung recently visited Brussels to advocate for deeper collaboration. Her message was clear: Canada is looking beyond the US and wants to make it easier for its businesses, especially small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, to tap into European markets. However, there's still a long way to go. In 2020, only 57% of Canadian exporters eligible for CETA benefits were actually using them. Many businesses, particularly smaller ones, struggle with the complexities of international trade agreements. To address this, Ottawa is stepping up its efforts to educate and support SMEs, offering financial aid and advisory programs to help them break into European markets. One notable initiative, the Can Export SES program, offers grants of up to $75,000 to assist small businesses in developing and implementing export strategies. With over 98% of Canadian businesses categorized as small or medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, the government recognizes that helping these businesses leverage CETA, Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, could be the key to reducing Canada's vulnerability in trade disputes with the US. When the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted global trade, Canada had to rethink how to support businesses in expanding internationally. Traditional trade missions became impossible, so the government shifted its focus. Instead of in-person meetings and overseas networking events, they began promoting virtual trade shows, digital marketing campaigns, and even assisting businesses with the costs of adapting to new international regulations. The aim was clear: to make it easier for Canadian companies, especially smaller ones, to tap into new markets beyond the US. The European Union, with its large consumer base and demand for high-quality goods, became a key focus. But trade isn't just about selling products, it's also about securing the materials needed to build future industries. This is where critical minerals come into play. Technologies like electric vehicles, solar panels, and wind turbines rely heavily on minerals such as nickel, aluminum, and uranium, resources Canada is rich in. The EU is seeking a stable, responsible partner to help meet its ambitious clean energy goals. Recognizing their mutual interests, Canada and the EU established a strategic partnership on raw materials in 2021, with discussions in early 2024, underscoring the urgency of collaboration. Both sides aim to reduce reliance on suppliers from politically unstable regions. The initiative begins with architects developing a framework that will eventually extend to other professions, making it easier for skilled workers to find opportunities on both sides of the Atlantic. While this might seem like a small step, its implications are significant. Facilitating the movement of talent between Canada and Europe will lead to more innovation, greater collaboration, and a stronger, more competitive economy in both regions. Rising tensions with the United States are providing Canada with more reasons to strengthen its ties with the EU. President Trump's latest trade threats, including a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, have only increased concerns about over-reliance on the US. But what truly raised eyebrows was his offhand remark about Canada becoming America's 51st state. Canadian leaders swiftly rejected this suggestion, calling it absurd, and reaffirmed their commitment to maintaining their sovereignty. For the EU, securing a steady supply of Canadian minerals decreases reliance on high-risk suppliers, while also creating pathways for European businesses seeking to expand into North America. This evolving relationship is not just a trade agreement, but a strategic shift, one that reflects the changing global economy. Countries are rethinking their alliances and prioritizing stability in uncertain times. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give us a thumbs up.